It is time for us to introduce Deborah Enix-Ross, our next speaker. Deborah is Senior Advisor to the International Dispute Resolution Group at Debevoise in Plimpton and a member of the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council. She is the President-elect of the American Bar Association, having previously served in many other roles throughout her long history of work for the ABA. And as with our other speakers, her full bio is available in the materials distributed previously. Today, Deborah will tell us briefly about the approach of the ABA to conferences and training in light of our shared goal to make arbitration events and conferences greener. Deborah?
Thank you so much, Dana, and to the organizers for this opportunity to speak to you about some of the ABA's best practices and learning throughout this pandemic. As you know, the ABA has had a lot of success with offering remote programming for lawyers in all practice areas, but especially in the field of dispute resolution. And the other component that I'd like to address today is the ABA's work in promoting diversity and inclusion, which I know Dana certainly raised at the top of this conversation. So as many of you know, the ABA has nearly 40 practice-related sections, divisions, and forums, and hundreds of committees that have offered thousands of hours of educational events throughout the years. And so I'm just going to talk about a snapshot, which would be the Center for Continuing Legal Education, the CLE, which produces a significant amount of the ABA programs. And if we look at the CLE for an indication of the growth of our online programming since the pandemic began in the spring of 2020. Before the pandemic, the ABA CLE Center had been producing about 700 live online programs a year. In 2020, that number went to 1,200 live online programs. And that has been, we've been drawing roughly, before the pandemic, 10,000 registrants a month. In last July, at the height, or June of last year, we were up to 100,000 registrants, and that has since leveled off to about 45,000 a month. But as you can see, there's currently a lot of interest in online programming. That's about a 70% increase in the number of programs we offered. And if my math is right, about 4.5-fold increase in the number of online registrants. So clearly, you know, we lawyers like statistics, and that's just to indicate that live programs and online programming has been increased within the ABA, and that we don't see any diminishing of that, even if and when we return to in-person meetings. So before I talk a little bit about our learnings and best practices, I did want to highlight some of the ABA's efforts in diversity, especially in diversity with respect to ADR and international arbitration. Many will know in 2016, the ABA House of Delegates adopted a resolution that urged all providers of legal services, including law firms and corporations, to expand and create opportunities at all levels for diverse attorneys, and further urged clients to help facilitate those opportunities. And so that original resolution 2016 did its job, we would say, because it inspired various tools and strategies that were produced by the ABA and elsewhere to promote diversity in the profession. It also got the attention of the ABA's dispute resolution section, who then in 2018 urged adoption of a resolution that providers of domestic and international dispute resolution to expand their rosters with minorities, women, people with disabilities, and people of diverse sexual orientations and genders to encourage diverse neutrals. And so that's where we find a lot of the work for the in the ABA and our diversity efforts in international arbitration. Now, turning to what I would call some lessons learned or best practices in the pandemic, I would say my observations fall into 4 broad categories, and forgive me if some of this is repetitive from some of the excellent speakers that we have already heard. I will try to bring some different perspective based on the ABA's learning, but you'll see that there is obviously some overlap. So the 4 broad categories I would say include logistics, meeting format, outreach, and networking. Logistics, we all know, there are the very practical things like making sure the panelists, you schedule a practice session for them, make sure that the speakers are logging on in advance so that they can test their equipment, and that they have a run of show, and that there's an order and everyone knows the format. So those are the same kinds of things that you would expect in outside of the virtual format, but they become critically important when you're doing virtual programming. But then there's also what I would say the meeting format. And here, I think we really need to pay more attention. There's been talk about hybrid meetings, and in the ABA's experience, the hybrid meeting, we conducted the ABA annual meeting, which took place in August, and it was a hybrid meeting, meaning that there were some folks that were participating in person and others that were participating virtually. And I leave it to others to talk about their own experiences with it, but I would say that the cost of hybrid is really quite expensive if you want to do it properly. There's a hotel space and the videographers and all of that. And I don't know that it's necessarily a great experience on either side for either participant, whether you're the in-person participant or the participant that's doing it virtually. So while I know that there is increased interest in hybrid meetings, I would just say, just as a caution, there are some drawbacks for it. This next point I'm making might be a bit controversial, but in terms of meeting formats, especially when we're talking about trainings and workshops, participants and whether can you compel people? And I know we're really at the stage now where mandates and compelling is really verboten, but having their cameras on, and that is for me something that I think we really need to think about. Some of us have been on panels or teaching, or I've taught classes, I've done workshops where you break into small rooms and people have their cameras off, and it's really very difficult to connect with people and to understand what's going on with them, and reading body language and all of that. Now, obviously, compelling cameras to be on, it is a bit drastic. But on the other hand, if it's the kind of format where you're offering a certificate or you're offering some other kind of indication that you participated, that could be something that should be strongly encouraged. I think it makes for a better experience. I think having interactive involvement in your meeting format is critical. So whether that's polling or calling on people or whatever it might be, again, depending on whether this is a workshop, is this meant to be the same as a massive conference, then perhaps not. But if it's meant to be an intimate training session, then I think that these are some indicators that you may wish to consider. And then the effective use of breakout rooms, and we'll see that we'll have that opportunity within this conference, within this meeting, and there are some best practices with respect to conferences and breakout rooms. The next is outreach. And what we've noticed, obviously, is that with the pandemic, you have the opportunity to reach more people, to reach more diverse audience, and diversity in all its form, including, let's not forget, some of the younger lawyers who weren't able to travel to arbitration conferences, who've now been able to participate. There are obviously challenges across time zones, but that can be managed. I think we've all had the experience of having to get up in the middle of the night or early in the morning to participate based on where you live. But there is now the advantage of having the outreach and looking for new audiences, especially for those who normally would not have been able to come in person. And then networking. We've heard a bit about that earlier. I would just say that my own experience with the, not my own, but in the ABA's early experience, we use remote meeting platforms that mimic the whole sitting at a table and mingling that you would have at a reception. And while that was novel at the beginning, we found that people are sort of tired of those kinds of social activities, and that if you are going to have social gatherings, that it might be better to do something that's more focused. And I think we heard about that with the previous speaker, whether it's a trivia night or a different kind of activity, so that there's networking with a purpose. So if the icebreaker is something that has to do with trivia or wine tasting, whatever it might be, but that is also focused so that you're in a room having that activity with people that share either attributes that you would like to meet or people with whom you think you have something in common, whether it's some substantive work or something of that nature. And then I did say that there were 4 points, but actually there's 5. There's the bonus, and that is the cost. And we have to keep in mind that it is expensive to return to in-person meetings, and that it can have an impact on diverse attorneys in particular, but it's also expensive to do the hybrid and other types of meetings. Just picking up on a couple of points from previous speakers, I know I'm running close to my time, but I love the idea with Roger Martin's point about what is your strategy, what is your niche. We all know that there are virtual conferences and trainings that are taking place every day. And if we wanted, we could sit in front of our laptops or iPads and do that with the camera off while we're doing other things and have it in the background. That's not, in the end, a very satisfying experience, or I don't think very sustainable. So I think it is important to, as the previous speaker said, to think about what do you offer that is different, and whether that's a certificate program or specialty arbitration programs, or maybe it's less focused on organizing the large conferences that we were accustomed to, and maybe thinking about smaller, more focused groups, more locally focused groups, so that people don't have to travel far, but that they are with a like-minded community, because there is some emerging research now that indicates that people do want to gather, they want to do it safely, and they want to do it in a way that is economical and for our purposes, also greener. So with that, those are some observations, both from the ABA's perspective in terms of what they've already been doing, and what we hope to see as we emerge. And finally, I would not be a proper ABA president-elect if I did not say that the ABA certainly would welcome any of you into our membership and support and our involvement in fields like dispute resolution, so that you can help us think through some of these issues as we go forward. I look forward to future conversations, and thank you again for this opportunity to speak with you.